The judge's gavel struck the wooden desk with a sound so small that no one else in the courtroom seemed to notice it, yet it echoed through every dream I had built over 15 years of marriage. Just like that, it was over. The man who had once promised to grow old beside me stood up without looking back. His parents rushed toward another woman waiting outside the courtroom, wrapping her in warm embraces while smiling as if this was the beginning of a beautiful celebration instead of the ending of a family. My 2 children held my hands tightly, confused by the silence and the tears I refused to let fall. 10 minutes later, while his family surrounded his mistress with flowers, hugs, and congratulations, I was carrying 2 small backpacks, 2 broken hearts, and 1 impossible decision. We were leaving everything behind. Within hours, we were on a flight to New York, with no certainty except one promise I whispered to myself. My children would never again believe they were someone's second choice. If you believe kindness is stronger than betrayal, if you believe people deserve second chances and that hope can rise even after the darkest moments, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world compassion still exists. I never imagined that the hardest part of divorce would not be signing the papers. It would be watching the people I had called family erase me from their lives before the ink had even dried. My former husband's parents never asked if their grandchildren were frightened. They never wondered whether we had somewhere safe to sleep that night. Every ounce of their attention was focused on the woman who had quietly entered our lives months before everything collapsed. They praised her beauty, admired her confidence, and celebrated the future she represented, while my children stood in a hallway wondering why their grandparents would not even look at them. That image stayed with me long after the airplane lifted into the clouds. My daughter leaned against the window, staring silently at the disappearing city below, while my young son fell asleep with his small hand wrapped around mine. I looked at the lights fading beneath us and realized that grief often arrives without making noise. It settles into empty seats, forgotten wedding rings, unanswered phone calls, and tiny questions children are too afraid to ask aloud. New York welcomed us with gray skies and cold wind. It was nothing like the glamorous city shown in movies. For us, it was loud, unfamiliar, and intimidating. We arrived carrying only a few suitcases because most of our belongings had been left behind. There had been no time to argue over furniture or photographs. Those things suddenly seemed meaningless compared to giving my children a fresh beginning. Our first apartment was barely larger than the living room we had once owned. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors cooking dinner, babies crying, and televisions playing late into the night. The kitchen had room for only one person at a time. The bedrooms were so small that I slept on a folding couch while my children shared the only real bedroom. Yet every evening before bed, I reminded myself that this tiny apartment contained something our large house never had during its final months. Peace. Money disappeared faster than I had expected. Divorce had consumed our savings through legal fees, moving expenses, and endless paperwork. My professional experience meant little in a city filled with talented people competing for every opportunity. During the day I attended interviews. At night I cleaned offices, answered online customer service requests, and completed freelance projects while my children slept nearby. Coffee became my closest companion, and exhaustion settled permanently beneath my eyes. There were mornings when I questioned every decision I had made. Walking my children to school through crowded streets, I wondered if I had been selfish for taking them away from familiar friends and neighborhoods. They smiled less than they used to. They missed the only home they had ever known, even though it was filled with painful memories during its final year. Children, however, possess an extraordinary ability to notice love instead of luxury. My daughter once hugged me tightly after dinner and thanked me because our apartment always felt calm. She said nobody shouted anymore. Nobody slammed doors. Nobody disappeared for mysterious weekends. Her words reminded me that safety is often invisible until it has been lost and found again. Meanwhile, occasional updates reached us through mutual acquaintances. My former husband's family continued embracing the woman who had replaced me. They traveled together, celebrated birthdays together, and filled social media with smiling photographs that suggested perfect happiness. Friends occasionally asked whether those images hurt me. At first they did. Eventually I realized photographs cannot capture regret, loneliness, or consequences waiting quietly in the future. Life in New York slowly began changing us. My children discovered libraries larger than they had ever imagined. We spent rainy Saturdays exploring museums that offered free admission. Street musicians transformed ordinary subway rides into unforgettable memories. We learned that happiness often arrives disguised as tiny moments instead of grand celebrations. One afternoon I interviewed for a position at a nonprofit organization supporting families rebuilding their lives after difficult circumstances. The director listened carefully as I described my experience balancing work and motherhood. Instead of seeing weakness in my story, she recognized resilience. She offered me a chance to prove myself. That opportunity changed everything. The salary was modest, but the environment restored something inside me that I thought had disappeared forever. Every day I met people overcoming illness, financial hardship, loss, and unimaginable disappointments. Their courage reminded me that broken chapters are not the end of life's story. They are often the beginning of unexpected strength. Months turned into a year. My children laughed more often. Their grades improved. Our apartment gradually filled with inexpensive furniture collected from thrift stores, neighborhood sales, and generous neighbors. Every object represented perseverance rather than wealth. Every picture hanging on our walls celebrated memories we had created ourselves instead of moments borrowed from the past. Then one evening my phone rang. It was my former mother-in-law. For nearly 2 years she had never once asked about the children. Now her voice sounded unusually fragile. She explained that circumstances had changed. My former husband had lost significant investments after trusting the wrong business partners. Financial stress had transformed relationships within the family. The woman they had welcomed so enthusiastically had quietly left once money disappeared. Friends who had once surrounded them became increasingly distant. As she spoke, I felt no satisfaction. Revenge is often imagined as a sweet victory, but when real life presents it, the feeling is surprisingly empty. Pain had already taught me lessons that bitterness never could. She asked if the grandchildren would consider visiting someday because everyone missed them terribly. I looked across the room where my children were completing homework while laughing together. They had built a new life without waiting for apologies that might never arrive. I told her gently that forgiveness and access were not always the same thing. Healing required consistency, accountability, and time. Children deserved relationships built on genuine love rather than convenience or guilt. After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. For the first time since my divorce, I realized I no longer carried anger. The weight had disappeared somewhere between long workdays, bedtime stories, subway rides, and countless ordinary moments that slowly rebuilt our lives. Years passed. The organization where I had started as an employee eventually promoted me into leadership. I helped create programs supporting single parents beginning again after devastating life changes. My experiences became tools for encouraging others instead of wounds that continued hurting me. My daughter graduated near the top of her class with dreams of studying architecture. My son discovered a passion for engineering after spending countless weekends building models and solving complex puzzles. Watching them walk confidently toward their futures became the greatest reward I could have imagined. People often asked how I managed to recover after losing everything. The truth surprised them. I had not recovered by pretending the pain never happened. I recovered because I accepted that some endings rescue us from futures that would have destroyed us completely. Looking back, the most painful day of my life had secretly become the most important turning point. Had I remained in that marriage simply to preserve appearances, my children would have grown up believing disrespect was normal and love required constant sacrifice without mutual care. Instead, they learned something entirely different. They learned that courage sometimes looks like boarding an airplane with uncertain plans. They learned that dignity matters more than public approval. They learned that family is defined by love, protection, and commitment rather than shared last names. One autumn afternoon we walked together through Central Park surrounded by brilliant shades of red, orange, and green. My daughter smiled as she photographed the trees while my son joked about how quickly the years had passed. Watching them laugh beneath the wide New York sky, I remembered that frightened woman leaving the courthouse with trembling hands and swollen eyes. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her not to fear the unknown. I would tell her that one day she would wake up without checking her phone for painful messages. I would tell her that peace would eventually replace anxiety. I would tell her that her children would not remember expensive houses or luxurious vacations nearly as much as they remembered feeling loved every single day. Most importantly, I would tell her that being abandoned by people who failed to value her would never determine the value she carried within herself. The greatest victories rarely happen in courtrooms. They happen quietly in ordinary mornings when children feel safe, mothers rediscover confidence, and hearts once shattered begin beating with hope again. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need encouragement today, subscribe to Kindness Speaks, and let others know that even the deepest heartbreak can become the foundation for an extraordinary new beginning. Before this story ends, we have one special request for you. Please leave a comment and tell us, what is one difficult chapter in your life that eventually became your greatest blessing? Your words may give hope to someone reading the comments who feels completely alone today. Sometimes the people who walk away are unknowingly making room for the life we were always meant to live. The road may begin with tears, uncertainty, and unbearable loss, but if we continue moving forward with kindness, courage, and faith, we often discover that our greatest destination was waiting just beyond the ending we feared the most.